first to suggest some type of carving to commemorate the Confederacy on the face of Stone Mountain. It actually isn't completed until 1972, so there's a long gap here. You can see it first begun 1925. This was, in the papers. It was sort of I had that clip from one of the New York Times write-ups on it. This is going to kind of dwarf the monuments of the ancient civilizations, it didn't really go anywhere. It was about 3 years and kind of stalls out, lack of funding. They changed carvers. The guy who went on to do Mount Rushmore was actually involved in this carving at some point. I can't remember his name. It's a strange name. And so for a while, the property around Stone Mountain and the mountain itself was actually privately owned. It's not until the late 1950s that the state of Georgia purchased the mountain, took ownership over the property. And so it was under public ownership that the carving, this monument to the Confederacy, resumes in 1964. And that's key because this is the year that the Civil Rights Act is passed. This is the height of the civil rights movement, and the state of Georgia is moving in a different direction, right? The carving's completed in 1972. I had to look this up because I didn't know, but the first laser show was 1983, so it's a bit later that all the fanfare and popular activity around the carving starts to happen. There's another history of Stone Mountain that if you go to the Stone Mountain Park's website, it does not mention. If we could go ahead one more, and that is that Stone Mountain was one of the active places in which the Ku Klux Klan was quite active throughout the 20th century. First organized a rally in 1915 under its second imperial wizard, W.J. Simmons. He was from Atlanta. And they would continue to hold rallies there throughout the 30s and 40s. I think that maybe the last one was 1946 or 48, at least it's kind of officially sanctioned. So this was a postcard sort of depicting, and celebrating the re-emergence of the Klan in 1915. The Klan would go on in the 1920s to become a truly kind of national organization, not one confined to the South. So Stone Mountain, the carving on Stone Mountain is really likely the most permanent monument to the Confederacy. I mean, they could, I guess, blast it off the face of the mountain, but I don't see the political will in Georgia doing that anytime soon. Should also note that the town of Stone Mountain, which is a suburb of Atlanta, as of the 2010 census, was 75% African American. So this is a Confederate monument, a very prominent one, right in the heart of a predominantly black city. I want to move further back in time now. Try to situate Stone Mountain, the Mississippi state flag, the monument to General Lee that's in Charlottesville, where the Unite the Right rally was in August of last year. I want to try to situate that in a deeper history of Civil War memory and commemoration, and what we can call the myth of the lost cause. That when Dulcie asked me to give this talk, she said some of you were asking her about that, the lost cause. So we'll define that and talk about what it is and what its sort of physical manifestations are, and the geography of towns and cities. So let me start with a definition of the lost cause, provide us some framework for understanding the debates over Confederate symbols and monuments. So I'll quote probably the most famous historian of the American South, C. Vann Woodward, who in 1951 defined the lost cause as a, quote, cult of archaism, a nostalgic vision of the past That's broad, but more specifically, it's a description of a way of thinking that harkens back to an imagined glorious past before the so-called War of Northern Aggression. Right? It's a way of framing and remembering the history of the American South and the Civil War that elevates noble defeat in battle, celebrates a way of life rooted in an agrarian economy, and downplays or erases the brutality of slavery, thus deflecting any charges of racism at those that subscribe to it. Okay. Now, this is most often espoused. I was trying to think, well, what's the most sort of common representation of this? I'd say it's the catchphrase, heritage not hate, right? Which is a kind of innocuous phrase which we hear as a justification for continued displays, largely of the Confederate flag, but other kinds of Confederate symbols as well. We see it in films like Gone with the Wind, which kind of celebrate this agrarian past. And in television shows like The Dukes of Hazzard, right, which were quite popular. One of the stars of that show, Ben Jones, entered Georgia politics with the goal of preserving Georgia's Confederate heritage. Could we go one more? Okay. So, I don't know which maps to pick. This one seemed good to me, right? With the sort of original seceding states before April 15th, and then secession is upon us too, right? So that's another one, right, coming up. And then states after. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the Confederacy in its relationship to the lost cause. So historians of the American South have long debunked the lost cause as an inaccurate representation of what the Confederacy stood for. All we have to do is turn to the words of Confederate leaders themselves to see this, right? So I'm gonna quote some of these. In its Articles of Secession, Georgia's drafters wrote, quote, "For the last 10 years, we have had numerous and serious causes of complaint against our non-slaveholding Confederate states with reference to the subject of African slavery. They have endeavored to weaken our security, to disturb our domestic peace and tranquility, and persistently refuse to comply with their express constitutional obligations to us in reference to that property," meaning African slaves. "And by the use of their power in the federal government has striven to deprive us of an equal enjoyment of the common territories of the Republic." In other words, right, the expansion of slavery into the American West. Right? Similarly, Mississippi's drafters wrote, quote, "Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interests in the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce on earth. These products are peculiar to the climate verging on the tropical regions, and by imperious law of nature, none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. These products have become necessities of the world, and a blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization," end quote. Mississippi's likely referring to cotton, but this would have been true of sugar, rice, indigo, tobacco grown elsewhere in the American South.